online facilitator. I work in Quest Alliance in capacity building team. And once again, I welcome every one of you and very glad to see you every week on this Friday evening. So I welcome all of you to this masterclass on post-COVID-19, exploring the landscape of platform economies. So yeah, moving ahead. So as you are aware, this masterclass is organized by Trainer Tribe. And in case you want to share your experience in your social media handles, please do not forget to use hashtag Trainer Tribe, this being our official hashtag. So as usual, you are aware by now that the host has muted you, and this is so to avoid background distraction so that we do not get any disturbance while or throughout the session. And also please make sure that you are staying muted throughout the session unless you are speaking. But as always, again, the chat box is always open out there. So please make sure that you are always buzzing it throughout. So yeah, those of you that are joining us for the first time, Quest Alliance is non-profit organization that works in the transforming school to work ecosystems through self-learning. And also we equip young people with 21st century skills, and we transform learning ecosystems through educational technology, capacity building, and collaboration. And also we have reached around 4,000 educators across 50 plus organizations, having around 330 training centers, working with 45 partners in 22 states across India and 7 state government partnerships. So just a moment to thank all our donors and partners for their continuous support and also spreading the words around and getting you folks around here. So yeah, we thank all our donors and partners for their support. So we have, moving on with today's session, we have Aditi Surie with us. She is a researcher and faculty at the Indian Institute for Human Settlements. And we are very excited to have Aditi with us on this Friday evening. So let's all of us look forward to this very exciting and interesting conversation. So with this, over to you, Aditi. So I will stop sharing my screen so that you can share yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming this afternoon. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. So give me 1 minute. There we go. Hi, everyone. So good afternoon. I'm Aditi. I am a researcher and faculty at the Indian Institute for Human Settlements. This is a national educational institution based in Bangalore. And before I start in getting into what we're talking about today, I want to say thank you to Lenin and Lyman and to the Quest Alliance team for inviting me here. I'm very looking forward to speaking to all of you. And I want to get through a lot of things today and get to hear from you also. Just a quick introduction to me. I am a sociologist. I do academic research and I teach around the issues of technology, city economies, and labor in the informal economy. So these are the 3 major things that I focus on. And in particular, I study on-demand platforms or the platforms that are in the mobility sector like Ola and Uber, or food delivery companies or logistics companies, a lot of the apps that we have on our phones or that we've seen in advertisements around us. So I do research on them and I look at how those technology companies create certain kinds of working conditions and how cities and local economies in India impact how technology companies run their businesses and change them. So like I said, typically the companies that I look at are Ola, Uber, Swiggy, Rapido, Dunzo. These are just some of the companies. And over the years, I've been looking at how these companies have entered our cities, how they've changed, how they keep growing, how they stagnate. And with each of these changes in their businesses and in the kind of business decisions they take, how differently the people who work for them, the drivers, the delivery people, how they get impacted, how their working conditions get impacted, and how they experience the kind of work that platforms offer them. And since we are sitting in August of 2020, we are very much in the middle of the COVID pandemic, even though we're out of the national Indian lockdown. And so over the last few months, these companies have become even more topical and more people are talking about them. And since the international and national responses to the pandemic have been to lock down physical movement and expect all of us not to go to shops, expect all of us not to be very mobile in our cities, these delivery-based companies have become very kind of important in our economies. And the people who work on them have now become essential workers. So they were seen as people who were maybe filling the demand in, say, middle-class households in Indian cities. But because of the pandemic, they've become very essential workers to our cities. So it's a really good moment to be having this conversation. And so earlier, their health and safety were things that we didn't talk about. They were, the personal matters of them, but now their health and safety is the matter of the companies that give them work, and even for us as consumers, because everyone we interact with is seen in that light these days. And given the kind of economic response the lockdown has created, and over the last 5 years, we've had a lot of jobless growth in our countries. So I personally think that platform work is going to become even more sticky or be around in our cities even longer. So it's something that we need to start thinking about quite actively if we haven't already. So I'm going to come to some of the main things that I want to address this afternoon. But I want to just start by reminding us how much platforms have permeated a lot of our online existence, and they have a very forceful hand in creating digital culture. So these are two separate things. Platforms are a kind of technology company, and they create all the rules for the spaces they create for us, right? So WhatsApp determines how we interact on WhatsApp. WhatsApp determines whether we can make a video call to only 4 people or to more. Similarly, Uber and Ola do the same. They determine every aspect of how people work for them, not only because they are a company, but also because of the digital kind of interface that they have. And so all kind of platforms, whether they are the news ones or whether they are communication ones or labor platforms, like the ones I'm talking about today, have a single powerful hand in creating what happens in the economic space that they have. So keeping in mind the kind of power they have is very important, which brings me to the 4 questions that I want to try and take us through today. What are platforms? How do platforms see themselves? And how do others look at platforms? How do platforms interact with Indian cities differently than other places in the world, and why? What kind of power does a platform have? And what does India's experience mean for the world? And I think if we answer these 4 questions, it'll help us look at what the pandemic has done. Right? This whole afternoon is to try and understand what the post-COVID world means for different kinds of jobs and different kinds of skilling and education. And looking at these questions can help us do that. Before I actually start, I will ask you some questions through the next half an hour, 45 minutes. Please use the chat to drop in some comments. Please also keep putting your questions on the chat, and we will have 15 minutes in the end where I can try and answer some of them if you have questions. But please use the chat actively, and as much as I can, I'll try and monitor it. So platforms are a particular kind of business model, and they're a business model that has been around for almost centuries. The people who write histories of these business models say they've been around forever. But recently we talk about them a lot, and they've gotten a lot of attention because in the digital economy, the platform is a very popular model for getting out a particular kind of digital interface. And what platform companies say they do is that they connect different kinds of people. So they'll connect buyers with suppliers, they'll connect labor with the people who demand that labor, they'll connect certain kinds of people who give information to people who need information. So the platform always says that it's a matchmaker. It always facilitates an interaction between different sides of people. And if you think about what this means for the digital economy, how do you find people on the internet or online? You can't actually go to different places and find them, but you go to these matchmakers who facilitate that interaction. So platforms actually that way can determine how I represent myself as a buyer or a seller to other people, and vice versa. So this matchmaking is what they say gives them a particular kind of value. Um, and so as a matchmaker, a company creates an app, for example, and that app and all the infrastructure required to build that app, the people who make it, where the data gets stored, that's what companies say comes in their ambit. So the unique thing about a digital platform is that they say that that is the only thing they're responsible for: the infrastructure, the way the app works, and the kinds of people they want to connect to one another. So keeping this in mind, this is different from the way other businesses have run because, for example, these platforms don't take responsibility for how different kinds of customers or buyers behave. And they don't invest very highly in the skilling of any of these people, or they don't invest highly in the upward mobility of any of these people. So people end up coming to a platform to have some earnings, but they don't find work. So you don't typically go to a platform to think of building a career because there's no upward mobility. It's just a flat kind of economic market space where you get some work and get some connections to people who want to buy your services. And this is very much how the business model is explained. Now, as a sociologist, for me to understand a business model is very important because that kind of helps explain why certain things happen, right? And so often we hear of, you would have heard of the example of Uber and Ola, which are two very, very large platforms. They claim to have, lakhs of people that drive for them. And even if you look around in our cities all the time, you see that very much. You see lots of yellow board cars. And the story with the Uber and Ola people is very kind of important to keep in mind because Uber and Ola, both as companies and in other international companies like them, have never bought cars for their drivers. They expect drivers to buy their own cars. They expect them to take loans. They expect them to afford a very large asset that usually only middle class India can afford. And then they expect them to bear all the consequences and costs of keeping up that car, making it look good, making it smell okay, so that any customer that comes is okay with it. So for Uber and Ola drivers, it's been a very tumultuous 5 years or 6 years because companies offered them a high incentive for joining the platform. They gave them lots of money, up to ₹1,00,000 a month, for work that they did on the platforms. And then slowly we saw these incomes decrease. So over the years, you might have heard of different protests taking part in the country where drivers were very upset by having to bear all the consequences of these loans, while these companies continuously brought their incentives down for drivers and gave them less and less money, though they were earning some money. And this is typically how we understand what a platform model is. And this is a very important example to understand because this kind of dependence that platforms, force their hand on makes drivers very vulnerable, right? So you have people who've taken loans who can't pay them back, but they've taken a loan because a company has said that they'll pay them. The company keeps retracting that. And internationally, we've seen that this has been a very powerful thing, and courts have actually forced companies to reconsider their business models or stop functioning. So just to give you a very contemporary example, just yesterday or just earlier this week, a California court told Uber that unless it took accountability for all of its drivers, that it would have to shut down its operations, and most likely Uber will shut down in the city that it actually started out in. So it's a very contentious issue what the business model of the platform is. And it's one thing to be a driver in California and have that kind of a vulnerability. And it's another thing to be a kind of driver in India and have that kind of vulnerability because of the kind of income levels people come from and say the lack of financial security they have. And this just makes that even worse. But in my research, I found that there are many different kinds of platforms. Even within the platforms that do delivery work or different kinds or household services, there are different kinds of models. So there are much smaller platforms in smaller cities or in different kinds of segments that that offers full responsibility for people, right? And this is kind of important to think about when we understand why platforms have to be a certain way in India. So I'll give you an example that is very unlike the Ola and Uber model, because I think it's important to understand the diversity of platform companies. There's a food delivery company and a food making company that actually has invested a lot of money in creating kitchens, in buying lots of bikes, in paying their delivery people and their kitchen staff stable salaries as full-time employees, because food hygiene is a very valuable product to sell in the Indian market. So they don't only do delivery of food, but they actually create it, and they think that by creating very standardized healthy food that's worth the investment. So they're very unlike Uber and Ola, where the company doesn't take responsibility for the kind of service that's being offered. So when we think about what kind of employment can be generated in the post-COVID world or in the COVID world through platforms, it's good to think that, to remember that there are many different kinds of platforms, and it isn't only Uber or Swiggy that we have as examples, but some of these smaller companies are using the model of matchmaking to do somewhat better for people who work on them. Now, what the COVID moment has done is to make all businesses become very precarious. Many businesses haven't been working, they haven't been able to work, their supply chains have been affected, and they are about to shut down. And one thing that will happen in the next couple of months is we'll see some of these smaller platforms that we haven't heard of very often start to shut down. And what will end up happening is that these bigger platforms that are more, that are less good to their employees will start to become more widespread. And this is part of running a company in the digital economy, and especially platforms, that if you're a matchmaker and you have to have the largest market that you can have, then it means you need to have all the users on board. So if I'm Uber, I need all of Ola's users, I need all of Rapido's users, I need all auto riders to come join my platform for me to be the biggest platform and to have the most profit and generate the most value. And this kind of, this form of capitalism tends to do that in most sectors. So you'll see the same thing for other platforms, whether it's Facebook or Google. And so after the COVID, as the economy starts to recover from the COVID-19 lockdown and the pandemic, we'll start to see some of these things happen. And that means for anyone joining a platform or anyone working on a platform, their working conditions are bound to change if there's less competition from smaller platforms and we only have these big ones that are available. And so the second question I wanted to focus on is, I've been explaining what the platform model is for the point of view of the company that's running a platform. But there are many other people who interact and who are active economic actors on the platform, which is us as consumers, which is people who sell their labor or sell their services on the platform. And so for them, the platform means something else. And it's good to have a perspective of all of these sides, right? So to workers or to people who sell their services, a platform is the only, the app actually is the only way that they understand what their working conditions are. And so people are very dependent on any kind of changes in the market that take place for a platform. Now, I was talking about, if platform companies want to scale and get bigger, they have to get all of their economic participants and on board and all kinds of consumers. And so this is an aspect of scale, right? And while for many courts around the world, this has been a big problem because it takes competition away from the market. What I've seen, what I've noticed, and what my research shows is that in India, the scale that big technology takes on is seen as quite useful to governments, especially within the space of these services. And what I mean by that is that the Indian government in many different ways has partnered with platforms over the years, either for generating employment or for other purposes. And I'll just get to those details. But this scale, which might be a problem for the market or for the consumer or for the worker, is something that governments like and work with. And so thinking about what the platform economy looks like post-COVID, it's important to keep this in mind because this is the third very powerful actor that can start to determine some of those things. So the second question that's related to this is that how do platforms affect India or Indian cities uniquely? So, platforms are used everywhere, almost everywhere around the world in every major city market, be it London, San Francisco, Jakarta, Tokyo. Different platforms have been set up, either international platforms like Uber or different local examples of that. But there is a particular uniqueness to the way platforms have grown in India, and my business kind of analysis of that indicates this. And so it also explains why governments like to partner with platforms, right? So platforms have created many different kinds, many lakhs of jobs. Many lakhs of jobs, as they like to say in the country. And as you all know, as educators, I don't have to say this to you, that there is a big gap in the market for people who come out from either 12th education or higher education with where jobs are. And so when I interview platform workers or platform service providers, some of these narratives are very strong. And so a lot of people who leave educational institutions or are in educational institutions and want to be able to earn some money, where maybe 10 years ago they would have maybe worked for a BPO, they now work in a platform. And for a lot of these people, it's seen as a more aspirational place to work than, say, working in an internet cafe or, say, working in a small shop. Where they be able to earn some money for some kind of skill they have, but not necessarily what they've been educated for. So the platform is kind of a very small sliver of a job opportunity that people are hooking on to. So this makes it very important to see where our young people are going to work and who they're going to work for. Another reason that this platform becomes unique that the use of the platform is unique. So in my research, because I'm a sociologist, while I look at the business model, I look at why people are attracted to a business model like this as a worker. And I did a large set of interviews with over 200 platform workers in Bangalore while coming to these insights. And a lot of the people in Bangalore who come from smaller towns in the state or come from outside the city come to find jobs in Bangalore. It's a major metropolitan area. It's where you go to find work. And a lot of times when people do the work of driving or do the work of delivery or do similar work, they would be working in the informal economy. Now, the informal economy only means that people are working without contracts, they're working on verbal contracts, they're working without security of employment, they're working maybe for work that is maybe lower skill than they've been educated for, right? These are things that I've been repeating. I want to kind of explain a very powerful example that I found. When I started studying Uber drivers and Ola drivers in 2015, a lot of the interviews I had conducted with people in Bangalore, the driver said that this driving life is very difficult, but I know at the end of it, I want to be able to go back to my village and farm. And they said that a lot of the reason I've come to Bangalore is that because there's no water in my village, and there is no institutional irrigation, and I have no way of being able to use my land to make enough money to support my household. And this is the story with many kinds of people who enter the urban labor force in our country. And so very interestingly, one driver said that, whenever in Bangalore I see a little bit of rain come on the windshield of my car, I go back home immediately. I'm already in the car and I'll drive back to Tumkur or I'll drive back to Udupi. And they say that because the platform is a kind of space where you can decide when you want to work and don't want to work, because you don't technically have a manager or a boss standing on top of your head asking you if you're going to come the next day or not. It makes it very easy for them to be able to drive back for 5, 10, 15, 20 days to do the agricultural work they need to do to help their family who's already there doing it, and then drive back and join the labor force quite easily again. And I think this is a very important example, because if we look at the kinds of migration that have been taking place in India that have been climate change impacted, the platform actually gives people a very plug and play option. That's what I call it, a plug and play option into the urban labor force. Whereas otherwise, if you were someone coming in from Tumkur to the city and you didn't know anyone, you would have to find those networks. You would have to find someone you could trust who would put you in touch with someone they had worked with, which would maybe offer you some work or maybe not. And in those interactions of going through your networks to find people, there's a lot of discrimination that can take place. Often people's networks are limited to the community they come from, the language they speak, the caste that they're from, the subcaste that they're from. And people find it very difficult in the labor market to break out of that, which means if you're going from those social connections and networks into a job, often you don't have the ability to negotiate your rate or your income. And you are kind of stuck with whatever those people think and assume of you. And a lot of discrimination happens because of that. And a lot of drivers that I speak to say exactly that because there are no humans involved in platform work, they find it much easier for their dignity to have to work for some of these things, because that kind of discrimination isn't there. Now, they are obviously learning how to express different problems they have with their work now. But in terms of how they would have otherwise come into the city, this makes quite a big difference for their lives. And so following from that, there's another, major reason why governments have been allowing platform companies to work the way they want to without impeding them or stopping them in any way, is because a lot of governments around the world, not just in India, assume that technology and platforms can actually formalize the informal economy, right? In many different kinds of ways. This means being able to have all sorts of people who are otherwise working in the informal economy to be in the formal banking sector, to have them mapped and tracked for statistics, for our national statistics. It means that people have more access to government programs also, because now the government knows how to find an informal worker. So for many of these reasons, platforms have a very unique position in an Indian city versus, say, in San Francisco or New York or London or Paris, where they also work. Their platforms don't have the same impact on the world. So when we think about what the COVID-19 pandemic has done, it has, because of the restrictions we've had on movement, it has forced many companies to go digital, to go online, much like why we're speaking on Zoom here today versus how we could have been speaking otherwise. So this ability for technology to have everything on a common platform, and for a platform to bring people together, is what governments think is a very valuable addition. And so this changes the way the state, this changes the way people create laws around these things and create policies also. Now the third question I want to get at is, given that, many social commentators, many governments and politicians think that platforms have this power to formalize an economy, or to formalize a financial system, or to take informal workers into the formal economy. It's a very powerful thing. It's part of India's developmental trajectory. Was supposed to be one where we were all working in the formal economy across the board. And this is something that we've seen hasn't happened. We still see many people who are working as domestic workers, whose contracts are all verbal, street vendors who don't have any protection. And so this is a very powerful kind of economic force. And so that's why I come to the third question, which is, what are the kinds of powers do these companies have, and what kind of powers do they have because they are technology companies? And I want to bring us to an example of Urban Company, or it was called Urban Clap before. And this is a very big company in India because it provides, it's, I think, the country's biggest home services platform. It provides carpenters, electricians, plumbers, in a way that as a consumer, I can find them on an app, and I can decide who to call in. Now, typically how we found carpenters and plumbers in our homes has been through networks, has been through, you ask a security guard near you, you ask someone in the local market, you ask your neighbor, you find someone who's a trusted person to be able to come into your house, whose work is good, whose skill is good, who has a good track record. And this has been typically how we find these services in our cities. Now, Urban Company has changed that. They've put it on an app. And when I asked carpenters, what do you think that the company has done for you? Why do you not still work in different neighborhoods as you used to before? And they said that when I go to a customer's house for the first time, they are very kind of rude to me. It's very difficult to negotiate the price that I want. I have to really prove, I have to work for very little money to prove that I can do good work, and then maybe they'll take my pay up. They'll take my service fee up. And I was very interested in understanding how that service fee is created. And they said, because Urban Company has now created a rate card for us, this service is set. This service fee is set. So even if I work for customers off the platform, if I go back to their house without going through Urban Company, I know that this is a dignified service fee that they will give me, because Urban Company has said that this is the service fee, and I haven't had to negotiate it myself. And coming back to the point on discrimination that I was making before in these economic interactions, right? These platforms are becoming a middleman for more than just matchmaking people, but they have the power to actually set an entire service fee. Now, if we look at taxis, for example, that the fare for a taxi is set by a city government. Now, if you look at the fare for the service fee for a carpenter, no one sets that service fee. But Urban Company has come into the market in India for all of the metropolitan market and said, we are going to be the ones who are going to do that. And it is a far more power than just matchmaking and bringing people together. And related to this is that, you know, these companies are some of the first companies to be ushering people into the digital economy, which means a number of things. They're the first people to not only, you know, the people who haven't been on the internet before have, you know, have had first access to say Facebook and YouTube and maybe WhatsApp and other social media applications, but those now haven't necessarily been for any economic transactions or for livelihoods. These are the first companies to be creating digital livelihoods for people, and they have a lot of sway in how that is generated. And also part of the digital economy that I haven't been talking about so far, but I'm going to bring in a little bit of, is that a lot of it works on how companies are able to use data to effectively make people to find the different kinds of things that people need to be on the platform. Sorry, just hold on. Yeah, to be on the platform. So one of the major ways in which these companies will have more and more value as we go on in our economy is that they've created the first data identity for a person who has otherwise not had one. And I'll give you a small example of this to understand because it's a little complicated. When I was speaking to the CEO of a delivery company or a delivery platform, they deliver anything from your house to another person's house. So, or they'll go stand in line, iPad or the next iPhone. And so they have to be able to trust their delivery people a lot when these transactions are taking place, because they're not only delivering a good, but they're actually buying them and they're responsible for their safety in that time. When I asked him, you know, what's the biggest challenge you've had in your company? He said that he said that I don't know how to trust any of my delivery people when they first come to me. So he said that one of the first things he's had to do is to create a credit score for each person who's joined his platform. So a credit score is typically something all of us who have taken loans, who are paying back mortgages, who have ever bought a car, who take educational loans tend to have. So for people who haven't been taking loans, and there are a number of there are millions of unbanked people in India who haven't been using formal banking systems, these companies are the first ones to actually create that score. Now, for many of Indian citizens who have the privilege of being actually governed by financial institutions like the RBI, there's certain laws around how these credit scores are created, how they're used. But for these people who haven't been, these companies are the first ones to actually do it before the government's been able to get involved. So they have a lot of power in generating these kind of identities for people. And so we think about in the post-COVID world, if more and more people are going to start using platforms, then they need to also not just have the skills and the digital literacy to understand how to use these platforms, but be very aware of what is happening with their data, of how they're being perceived and looked at. Because once numbers go into a computational system or they go into a computer system, it's very difficult to actually change them. And one of the biggest issues with the platform economy is that lots of things are automated and they're not done by humans. So there are very few people that people can reach out to. And I'm just going to leave a small comment on this last question because I realized that we are at 4:45 and we should leave some time for questions. And that is, what does India's experience with platform economies mean for the rest of the world and vice versa? And I think this is, I want to leave on a note that isn't so. You must have obviously heard as educators that the future of work is a very important space to try and understand and to see how these technologies are changing the labor market and what what our young people need skills for. And what we've seen is that the Indian experience with platforms doesn't actually translate out to the rest of the world. While India is a very kind of big market for a lot of this technology, and people come and spend a lot of money to try and understand the Indian market, there's not a lot of examples um, where the Indian case of platform work has really meant a lot to the courts outside, or has meant to people understanding these platforms. So I would say, so sorry about that. So I would say that as as educators and as people who build these technologies, we need to be very mindful about making sure that our experiences of technology are just as important as some of the examples we hear from abroad. And I've tried to compress a lot of information in the last 40 minutes about the sector of platforms, the kind of businesses they are, how they have adapted to India, and what these adaptations mean for our young people who are entering the labor market, especially after the COVID pandemic. And I hope this has informed your views in some way and it's been useful. I'm going to stop here. I have written a lot about this issue. It's also my doctoral work now. And so if you do want to read anything about other things I've written, I have a website and you can always contact me. I'm very, very passionate about this topic, and I would love to, speak with any of you offline. I'm going to stop here. And I noticed there's been some uh, questions in the chat. So I'm just going to look at those. Would anyone from Quest like to facilitate that, or should I just go ahead and look at some of the questions? Maybe if you all have seen those questions, it'll be faster for me to answer them. Okay, I'll just read Vriti Sahani's question, and please do add your questions in here. I might have, I speak from my area of expertise, but if I can help translate some of this into your work or your questions, I'd be more than happy to. So please use the chat box. So Vriti's question is, do you think that platforms can figure out the issue of delivery, raw materials and finished goods from villages or interior parts of the company? Are there any successful examples of this? Preeti, this is a really important question. Thank you for asking, because the kind of companies that I've been talking about are very consumer led, and there are far bigger things that platforms can do than just to fulfill consumer demand, like for food delivery. So this is really important question. Digital platforms so far have been able to find scale and success in most metropolitan cities. So this has meant that not that many platforms other than in agriculture have been trying to bring in a supply chain from our villages or interior parts of the company, but of the country, sorry. But during the last 5 months, a lot of online businesses to do with garments and handicrafts and textiles have come up as a way to try and bring demand, to try and bring the raw materials from villages and consumer demand from cities together. We will see how successful these examples are over time. But abroad, there are more industrial examples of platforms where people have used different kinds of artificial intelligence to actually create, to do mining work, to extract minerals from the earth and to try and bring them into different kinds of industries that need them. So there are examples of this taking place, just as not as much in India right now. We mostly have these consumer kind of examples to draw on. There are certain kinds of organizations like SEWA, which is the Self-Employed Women's Association, which is one of the world's largest association of informal women workers. They are trying to also build platform services. We hope to see more of these examples take place. And I think because of the COVID pandemic, there's more acceptability of these things. So I think we'll see them come. Yeah, we're looking through the questions. So Padma has written a comment. Thank you for your comment, Padma. And she's asked, are companies like Amazon, Flipkart, JioMart examples of platform economies? Absolutely. They absolutely are, Padma. They have a slightly different model where they are a marketplace and they're not a platform, but there are very many overlapping business decisions and business aspects to these companies. The examples that you've taken are, the largest platforms we have in the world, and JioMart is trying to make itself the large platform in India as well. And so these are very powerful companies, and a lot of the examples I've been giving, speak to the power that these companies have. So I'm just going to see if there are any other comments that I want to read. Thank you so much for using the chat and introducing yourselves. So Geeta Chauhan commented saying, people who don't know about digital techniques face more kinds of problems. And you're right, there's a skilling problem, there's a literacy problem, there's a problem of also being exposed to the kind of economics that digital things have, digital goods have. But also with the last example I gave about how data is used and how data will become more useful. There's a lot of gap and there's a lot of education actually to be done just in terms of that economy and how it works, so that people aren't made vulnerable by it. What about Senthil Kumar said about online education platform? Will these give tough competition to actual education institutions? I think so. If we look at the way educational platforms have been built out so far, and I'm going to ask the Quest folks to also talk about this because they would know this more than me. But there are educational programs that are training different kinds of tuition teachers. There are educational platforms that are creating massive open online courses for people. So there are many different kinds of ways. But face-to-face education and skilling is absolutely not going to go away. Actually, if we look at some certain kinds of countries in Europe, actually bringing back apprenticeship models so that people have a deeper knowledge of skills as a reaction to some of these changes in the labor market that are taking place because of technology and automation. So I don't see that trend happening in our country right now. But absolutely, I think online education, because one, we're being forced to do it, and two, because it actually creates more opportunity for people to learn different kinds of things. We will see some parts of that taking place. One particular company that I just want to mention is they were training tuition teachers to actually do face-to-face tuition in different small towns. And I thought that was quite a valuable kind of exercise and company to think about of what they can do for the future of education. Priti has said, we have been beginning to work in the space of self-employment. Your insights were useful to understand some aspects. Can you expand more on how platforms can play a greater role in self-employment in the future? So Priti, this is a very, very, very pertinent question because this is actually the question that's being debated in courts around the world and by policymakers and by labor unions around the world. So one model of the platform creates creates a kind of employment where you can think of being able to earn as much as hard as you work, technically. There's another kind of platform that creates a marketplace for you to sell your goods, and you can come as an entrepreneur and do that. So for example, Etsy lets any person set up a little online shop where you can sell whatever you like, and they don't put too many boundaries on how much you can, how much you have to price your goods or the way you have to market and sell them. So you have to look at different kinds of companies that want to draw value from their matchmaking for different ways. So Amazon, for example, gives self-employed people, or say entrepreneurs, a large reach because their marketplace is used by so many people. But at the same time, they have a lot of restrictions on how you sell things. They have restrictions on how you show up on a website. So each company actually has to be considered quite differently. And so all of these will have different implications for how self-employment will play out in the future. So I'm not seeing any other questions right now. So just give it a second, I think.
Aditi, so we have one more comment actually, and that's coming privately, so you cannot see. I'll read it out for you. So it says, it has come from G. Senthil Kumar. It says, ma'am, how can platform help a startup in India, fundraising, customer reach, acquire employee?
How can they bridge company? Can you just read the last part again? Sorry.
Yeah, just a minute.
Sorry.
So it says, how can platform help a startup in India, fundraising? Yeah, something is missing here actually.
Okay.
Customer reach, acquire employee.
Okay. So how can platforms help startups get more money and help them acquire more customers and
Right.
workers? So, like I said, the platform is, it's a word that signifies a particular business model. So there are platforms that do just crowdfunding, for example. You would have seen Milap, for example, is a crowdfunding platform. Keto, there are many others, Keto. And so they do help bring some money together for startups, but platforms don't necessarily otherwise do that. Because a platform is a matchmaker where it requires, for Uber to be a valuable business, they need to have the most number of drivers, to have the most number of customers, so that when a customer needs a car, they get the lowest waiting time possible. And the lowest waiting time possible is only if most number of drivers are on the app and on the platform. So in that sense, if you're an Amazon, if you're an Etsy, and you have a large number of subscribers to your app, then any company selling on that will have a large market share. So that's how they help, if that helps answer your question.
Sure. And yeah, there are many people asking for your website link. So yeah, you have just shared that. So everyone can reach out to Aditi offline as well, and you can surely visit her website. She has mentioned it right there. So yeah, even her ID she has just written, so you can always reach out to her. And I think, yeah, no more comments or questions, right? Sure. So I think, yeah, we can move ahead. I think, Lenin, we can launch the poll now. So yeah, thank you, Aditi, for such engaging conversation and discussion around here. And thank you. And I hope everybody had gained lots of insights on platform economies. That is something that we can really see with through people's comments out here. And in case you still have more thoughts, any opinions, any questions you want to ask Aditi, you want to get to know more, you can always reach out to her. Her website and email ID is right there in the chat box.
Thank you
And
everyone.
also, yeah. So yeah, poll has been launched. So kindly take a moment to please give us feedback so that we can always improve our future master classes.
Thank you everyone for listening, and thank you to Lennon and you for facilitating this.
Thank you, Aditi. Thank you for spending your weekend with us. And also, please everyone do join us on Trainer Tribe. Lots of conversations around the masterclasses topic goes on even after the masterclass. So make sure that you join us on Trainer Tribe. We are on Facebook, and we look forward to an ongoing conversation out there.